In this episode, we once again talk to Doug Hutchison of Chase Archery. Doug is the man when it comes to building strings and cables and tuning a bow to its optimum performance. Contact Doug at 816-885-7599 to get your bow premium tuned before hunting season gets here. Because once it gets here, Doug's going to be out chasing animals all over the country. Doug's contact info will also be in the show notes for this podcast. We covered so much in this interview that we went 2.5 hours. Needless to say, this will be a 2-part interview. This is part 2 of our interview with Doug. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, make sure you download and listen to it as well. Welcome to the Bowdudes, a podcast about archery and the lives it has ruined. The Bowdudes are not responsible for diminishing archery skills or lower IQ.
I worry about breathing.
Shut up and shoot.
And I'm totally lost. God, I keep having to remember that we're PG-13. Did Fritz help you with those pants?
No, he did not. I'm so glad you have yourself to crack up.
Logic and common sense will not be tolerated.
This is a very interesting podcast so far.
You know, people are always looking for a black and white. And I'll read on Archery Talk. You'll never see me post anything on Archery Talk, very seldom. But I'll read a lot. And you can filter a lot of knowledge. But if you don't have a little bit of knowledge, it can get you in a bad way real quick.
Yeah, you got to sift through the BS to get the good stuff.
Yeah, because there are a handful of guys on there. If you read their stuff, I mean, they should be smoking Levi without a doubt at every shoot. Because the way they're tuning in, they'll have you convinced if you can't shoot a bear shaft out of your setup at 50 yards and get it to hit your same point of impact, and then you can't shoot and you don't have a tuned bow. That's,
come on, buddy. Let's go shoot.
That's so far out of the realm of reality. It's not even funny. And I don't mean to pick on that guy, but and in his mind, that's what he believes.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. Because if we all had to worry about that and shooting bear shafts, and that seems to be the new, and I do tune with bear shafts, don't get me wrong. There's a lot you can learn about your arrow spine, the cam reaction, knock travel, vertical and horizontal. There's a lot you can learn. Riser flex, some of that will show up when you take the fletching off. But it also will tell you a lot more about what you're doing. If I can get it to shoot through like that through the machine, and then I put it in a guy's hands and he's getting a nasty tear,
that tells you everything you need to know.
Let's look at your grip. Let's look at your face pressure on the string. There's a lot of different things that could be user error, and not everybody's going to be able to work around that. It doesn't mean you can't shoot well.
So if somebody gets a bow super tuned by you and they come, will you work with them a little bit?
To be glad to. I always do.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I want to help. I want you to be successful. I want you to shoot the best you can to be happy, because this game isn't fun when you're not hitting where you want to hit.
Right. Well, keeping on that, when you initially set up a rest on a bow, is it your goal to try to keep it center shot and work around it with the bus cable or the yokes and all that?
I know I keep going back to, once again, it depends on the bow.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of variables, arrow spine, the arrow rest that you're using, things like that. For the most part, your manufacturing center shot, I can read an owner's manual and tell you how well their quality control probably is. If you're giving me a 1/2 inch variable on your center shot, there's an issue, because there's no way that you should have that big of a variable. Most of them will say, 3/4 to 13/16 or something, give you fairly close, and that works. And then I'll try to keep it within that realm, and then I'll start looking at other variables, because I do think a bow shoots better when it's closer to the center and in the path of the string coming forward.
So I don't know if I've ever read an owner's manual. Do they give you all these specs in there?
Usually. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I guess I better start reading them.
Or tune charts, or
I could just take my bow to Doug and not worry about it.
Well, some companies are a little more.
I think I'll do that from now on.
Give you a little more information than others, but there are ways, and it's hard for me to explain. But there are ways to find the center track of the cam, and I really want to keep it super close to that because I think that's where it's the most forgiving.
How important is it to have your cams lined up straight as opposed to having a cam lean or? Can you even do anything about cam lean on the Elites?
Yeah, you can change shims and things like that, but it's not always going to. It doesn't. I read that all the time on Archery Talk about people bagging on cam lean. You need it sometimes. On some systems, you need it, and it's a good thing. It's no different than the expression that you've got. Basically, instead of putting cam lean, they're changing. You can adjust the limb pocket to adjust where the tip of the limb is and the cam comes off, so you're changing the string angle, and that'll correct imperfections in your arrow flight.
Same thing, just different way to get to it.
Different way.
Yeah. You eat this stuff up, don't you?
Yeah,
it would drive me
kind
nuts.
of a geek, and sometimes it's a curse to.
I just can't
and the
wrap
thing
my
is
head around it.
If it was always a black and white world, and not everybody's mind will work that way. If it was black and white, it would be a whole lot easier. But there are so many different variables, and you can take 5. Bows set up exactly. I had 2 E35s. Both of them shot absolutely phenomenal. Exact same arrow rest, everything on it was carbon copy. Center shots were a little bit different.
Wow.
Both shot extremely well. But if I matched one to the other, it would not. And I mean, I went down to the nearest 1,000, miking out shims and everything else, but that could have been the finish. It could have been the way the limb was cut, the yoke in the limb, where it was set in the cam. A lot of different things can cause differences.
Have you ever had a bow that you could not get it to shoot the way you wanted it to? I'm surprised I got any hair left because yes, I've had some, and I can tell you certain models and I won't name them. But sure.
There's been some where like the pocket, kind of like what we were talking about on the expression. That's a great system, and in the right hands with somebody that understands it, you can do a lot with it. But you can also get yourself in a lot of trouble. Mm-hmm. And there are some, say, a limb pocket, with a super skinny limb that has a little bit of torque anyways, or a riser that flexes. Just because it's stiff in one direction doesn't mean it's going to be stiff whenever you put the load of a heavier, at 50 pounds, it didn't bother it. Shooting 75, 80 pounds, there's a lot of flex to it.
Right. And
that can cause problems. I've had some that,
You want to buy them and just take a sledgehammer to them.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they are a manufactured piece, and there are a lot of pieces in a bow, and it only takes one of those being off just a little bit. You got plus or minuses in your tolerances, and a little bit here and a little bit there can add up to a lot over the time, depending on where it's at. And you start changing, the degree of your limb pocket coming off the riser and stuff like that. That can give you nightmares. And for a guy that doesn't understand it, man, it can just take the fun clean out of it.
Oh,
and usually what will happen is a guy will say, that bow's the biggest piece of crap, and they'll label it as XYZ Bow Company, they're junk. And it was just that one that had an issue. And, I know a lot of the manufacturers, and I can get parts to fix that.
Right.
Comes back around.
Get to those questions. Those are good.
About the sights?
Yeah.
Are you okay on time?
Yeah.
Okay.
As long as people don't hang up on us.
No, they're not. What kind of sight do you use personally, and how many pins do you use on it on your hunting sight?
Personally,
that was excellent.
Thank you. Did you write this?
I've been shooting spot hog sights for going on over 15 years now. I can tell you I've started using them because they were very solid built, and I have drugged them from Alaska to Africa. I've had them stepped on by horses. I don't know how many times they've been bumped and banged. They just don't move. I shoot 5 pins. It's just been a bomb-proof sight. As a matter of fact, the original set that I bought, I still have. I did change out. They changed their pin a little bit, and they added a wrap from when I first got them. But since
pins are solid on them too, then
Yes, very solid. It's, as far as the pin, if I was shooting serious tournament stuff and things like that, I don't know that thick of a pin would be something that I would necessarily want. Excel makes a great sight. But as far as durability and doing what I want, having a good solid pin that's bright enough to see and still
thick as far as the pin housing?
The actual pin itself is fairly large, and it can cover up some target, especially as you start getting out at distance. And if you're, really hammering on lower 12s and stuff, that's a little bit bigger pin. But I personally, for a hunting site and even tournament, it's my favorite.
Do you you use a 5-pin? Do you set your pins up in any certain configuration?
Yeah, usually how I'll set my personal stuff up to begin with, it sounds kind of odd, is I'll set the top of my level will be the first one that I set when I'm sighting it in. And I'll walk back to get it to where it's sighted in.
What do you mean by that?
I'll use the top of my level like it's my very bottom pin, and I want to go back to 80 yards. And I'll sight that in to where I'm drilling my left and right. So that's my longest shot that I'll take, and I do it mainly for practice. But if I make a bad shot on an animal for any number of reasons, I want to be able to, if I've got the opportunity to shoot it again, I'm going to shoot. I'm going to put another arrow in it. That's the humane way to do it. I don't care.
Right.
And I will practice that distance. So I sight the top of my level at 80, and then.
How do you know you're going to hit the target? Is there some?
I've got a big target, and like I said, I'll start out fairly close, and I'll just adjust it as I walk back and get it to where it needs to be.
At 80, is it like minute a sheet of plywood, or?
No, it's just
that's
a
what mine
target.
Would be.
Well, not once you've I know roughly where it's going to be anyways, because I've got a chart. I'll take my bow once it's sighted in and everything's exactly where I want it. I'll stand at 4 yards and put a vertical line on, and I'll shoot at a spot, and I'll aim every one of my pins at that one spot, and then I'll measure that so I know where it needs to be. So then, as a quick reference, I can, if it's nighttime and I show up to Iowa and I think my bow got bumped or something like that, which I will tell you with the Spot Hog, that site, it's never moved up, not once.
But you got a reference you can just slap
I've
it
got
on
a
there.
quick
So you're
reference.
standing at 4 yards and you're shooting every one of your pins.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if a guy comes in, I can think of several times guys, bolt on a brand new sight and they go to take that first shot at 20 yards and they may be shooting at a big target and they miss the whole thing and they just trashed a $10 to $15 arrow.
Right.
That's not cool. So what I'll do is if you come in, I'll put a small dot, a very small dot, something you can see but still aim, and I know at 4 steps, and it'll vary a little bit, I'll see where you aim at that spot, where you hit, how close you're going to be at 20 yards.
Huh, I'll be darned.
So I can adjust it. And contrary to popular belief, at that distance, you need to be, for me, I would use my 45-yard pin to hit at 4 steps. And I know that's
But
real close.
you're shooting every single pin at that distance.
I'll shoot every single pin and taking a measurement.
They'll stack up.
Yeah,
right?
Because even if I have to, if I've got a big enough target, if I roll into a place late at night and I want to shoot a couple just for that confidence, I'm going to shoot it. I'm going to check it. I can take those measurements and I can tell if it's off.
What yardages do you set your pins at?
I always set like I said, my level is 80, but then my very top pin, I do 25, 35, 45, 55, 65. And that gives me 0 to 80. And actually, I can shoot out to 100 with it. I know where to hold and stuff like that. I know my trajectory. And the reason why I do the 25 is I'm trying to get the most out of the arc of my arrow. And for hunting purposes, 0 to about 33 yards. And I'm not shooting super fast because of the poundages and stuff. And I shoot a fairly heavy arrow. 0 to 32, 33 yards, I'm aiming center 10 on a 3D target, and I'm killing that animal.
Yeah.
So that gives me a bigger room for error. Where if I did 20, 30, I have to think about it more. I'm more apt to grab my rangefinder and zap a deer as he comes in quick and stuff for that fear.
Sweet.
And for elk hunting, it's great. And if you're shooting a faster bow, I know a lot of guys that are putting that top one about 32, 33 on a slider, and any elk, depending on how fast you're shooting, comes in within 40 yards, you're really good.
Do you have any tips or secrets on a guy sighting his bow in?
Yeah, I think what gets guys in trouble more is they like to shoot dots. We've all kind of been accustomed to shooting dots, whether you're started out shooting spots indoors and stuff. I don't think that's the best way to sight your bow in. I think you need to shoot lines. Shoot a vertical and a horizontal line. I don't worry about my lefts and rights very much at 20 yards. I worry about them it's funny because at 20 yards, my left and right can be money. But I back up to 80 and it's off a few inches. And I'll adjust it at 80 and then adjust my sight left and right. So I walk back up to 20 thinking it's going to be off now.
And
it's dead on.
Still on.
Because it's micro adjusting, no different than, a little bit's a lot on an arrow rest, and it really is on your sight too, as long as you're consistent. But
what if it is still off?
If it's off at 20?
20 and 80. Yeah, or if you get it on at 80, and you come back up at 20 and it's off.
Okay, then I'm going to probably split that difference and check it.
Okay.
And see. And if it's creeping that one direction, one way or the other, then that's walkback tuning, and then you're making a very minor adjustment to your rest. Or if you're very confident in what the bow was doing through the machine and stuff like that, when there wasn't torque put on it, then I start maybe adjusting my grip pressure just a little bit. And I found that some bows, just a little bit of rotation in your wrist can make a world of difference in how well it shoots a straight line.
How do you set your grip?
It depends on the bow. I can tell you, whenever I was shooting an Insanity CPXL, that bow was it and I kind of went around and around a little bit, and it had everything to do with the grip. At the end of the day, I think if you start crossing over your lifeline with the grip, you're going to get into issues with the majority of the risers out there and grips out there today. If you start rotating your hand into it and you start getting this muscle, and it's hard to do, I'm saying this on a podcast and I'm showing you.
Right.
But if you start putting this into the riser, any change in your finger hand pressure, it flexes that and it causes more lefts and rights.
And you're kind of talking about your pinky pad. I see if you look at your hand, you kind of have two big fat pads at the bottom of it, a pinky pad and a thumb pad.
Yeah.
And you're talking about if you get your pinky pad into is what you're talking about right now.
I think that, especially a guy with big hands, heavier, big fingers and stuff like that.
We don't have that problem, Vince.
Yeah.
You got fat.
Bob, you got big hands.
Yeah.
The more
you have lady hands.
You get that into the riser
Those are
more.
cute.
You're good. Yeah. I'm not saying you can't shoot it well, but you're going to get more. Any variables you do, more lefts and rights.
You sure you're healthy enough for that?
Okay, that's just like on these expressions, the 3D and the other. It's got that wider grip now.
Uh-huh.
I've always shot a skinnier grip, whether it was Prime or whether it was Hoyt, and I really have to pay attention to what I'm doing on this fatter.
Yep.
I mean, if I have a bad shot, usually it's because I've messed up on my.
Yeah, the older Matthews wood grips, very susceptible to that.
Yeah.
Hoyt, the rubber grip, I can't remember the name of it, felt really good, but super
finicky.
Yeah,
that's why I always took them off.
And,
I did too.
And not everybody, it didn't affect everybody the same way, depending on how consistent your grip was. But I noticed that guys with bigger hands, my buddy Dennis, he's on their pro staff and stuff, really good shot. He struggled. He goes, man, it feels so good, but his lefts and rights were a nightmare. And it was because of that grip. Take it off, put side plates on immediately. His line was money all day long. So that's how, long story short, that's how I sight my left and right. And then as far as each individual pin, and I don't think it's a good idea to try to do too much on one, I'll do it over a period of a couple of days sometimes, because it only counts if it was a really good shot. Mm-hmm. But I'll shoot, a line running left and right. And that's how I sight my pins in, and I don't worry about my left and right. I just want to make sure I'm hitting that line at my exact distance, and then I'll sight my 25, 35 all the way back, and that's how I do all of them. And then I think where some pin guys get in trouble is the only practice at their top pin's 20. They'll practice at 20 and 30 and 40, but what happens when it's 24? They don't know where to hold it. So I want to shoot my top pin, say my 25. I'll hold on that line, but I'll step at 27 or 28 yards because I want to see my drop. Or I'll stand at 15 yards to see how much I'm rising. And that way I know what's going to happen whenever I draw back at a specific
What's a good idea in a ground blind, too, because you never know if an animal's going to walk out and 5 yards in front of you. You gotta know what pin you got to use. I
was out at the Snowbird shoot in Utah, and that is a really cool shoot for one. Mm-hmm. And you ride the ski lift up, and all day long we're shooting anywhere from 120. The average shot was like 60. You're stretching it out. Right. And you use rangefinder, so it helps. But the target that got missed more than anything, except for probably the mountain goat that was like 120 some odd yards down a super steep hill, was a Wolverine about from me to you.
Oh, yeah, everybody
was missing
their mind.
They're like, oh, finally a chip shot. I'll nail this one and zip it. And talk about the looks on some faces.
Yep, I've seen it 100 times, man.
Because they don't, they're thinking, man, I'm that close. So they'll put their 20 low.
Yep.
And
shoot right over top of it.
Depending on
to the ground.
And just because at that distance, I would probably actually use about my 65-yard pin because I've practiced it.
Yeah.
But what they haven't done is they don't realize that your arrow hasn't caught up to where your peep is. And what works for me doesn't necessarily mean it'll be the same for you.
Nope.
Because where you're anchoring and the distance from your arrow to your peep is different.
Yeah.
From one person to the next.
Is there any way to get more yardage out of your sight? Like you were saying that your bubble was your 80-yard pin.
Well, more pin. I mean, bigger housing and things like that. I found if I go more pins.
Do you anchor behind? Do you use an index finger and anchor behind your ear? Or do you use a?
I use an index finger. I shot a back tension for years and a thumb, barrel, but usually a hinge for a long time. Because of an injury, I can't use that type of release. I have no feeling in my hand. I use an index release, and I don't necessarily put it behind my ear. I've just got a spot on the corner of my jaw, and that works for me.
Yeah. All right.
And I've seen him shoot. He can shoot.
Well, on those real short targets like you was talking about, Robbie Valecchia, the Hood, he showed me how to do that. He takes his stabilizer off and he puts his foot on the peg and he gets way out there and when he shoots it, his arrow's just barely off the string when it comes off of you. He showed me that.
That's one way to do it. You guys have anything else on bows and stuff before we go to arrows? Are you still okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
What advice can you give a guy who's trying to choose an arrow for his particular setup?
It's like an antelope hunt.
Yep.
The first thing, you got to know your variables. What's the type of boat, the cam system you're shooting, how harsh the cam is. You really have to know your arrow length, your poundage, and what type of tip weight you want. From there, you're basically selecting your spine. Where I usually see people get in trouble is they worry. So say they're going to go on an antelope hunt and they want the fastest, flattest arrow they can get. So to cut weight, usually the first thing they'll do is they'll say, well, the 300s weigh 10.7 and the 500s, man, I can cut a lot of weight right there. That's not a good thing. You may be able to get away with that a little bit, but when you're making that big of a drop, I would always rather shoot a little bit stiff than a little bit light. And depending on how the knock travel, horizontal and vertical of a bow, you can get away with a little bit more with some systems than others. From there, I want to know what you want. If you're wanting speed, we're going to try to find an arrow that's spined for what you want, and try to match a weight that will work for you. And you can cut weight in components, whether you're going from a pin knock to just a regular, say like an AccuNock or something. They don't weigh near as much as a pin knock and then the pin and everything else. You can cut some substantial weight just in that. From one vein to the next, there can be, some veins can weigh close to 10 grains and another one only weighs 3,
Right.
So then,
and you'll still get the same guidance out of the light vein.
Yeah, you can.
Depending on the profile.
I was going to say, it depends on the profile. Depends on how it, how stiff it is and things like that. There's a lot of variables there too.
How long do you cut them?
Yeah, how do you figure that out? You just got to sacrifice an arrow or what?
No, it depends on what you're doing and how finicky the cam system is to some extent. As long as you're shooting a little bit on the stiff side, I can go, a 3/4 of an inch to an inch in front of the rest, cut it there, and that's usually where I like to put broadheads anyways. I don't like bringing them too close back to the launcher.
So you like your broadheads about 3/4 of an inch in front of your...
3/4 of an inch to an inch, somewhere right in there, yeah.
And keep your finger out of the way.
Yeah, it keeps everything
in front of the rest or in front of the shelf?
In front of the rest.
Okay.
It depends on the broadhead you're shooting. Obviously you're shooting the gobbler getters and stuff like that. You got to put everything up front. But that's stuff you've got to check also. Say like a rage. You take the long blades of those coming back. If you cut your arrow too short, those blades can hit that arrow rest and cause the arrow to come unknocked, and that can be a problem. I've seen that happen.
That piss you off.
Yeah, or you're shooting it. You got an arrow holder on your arrow shelf.
Yep.
Those rubber. And a lot of us use them. Guys shooting your blades a certain way, and because they're long, a blade hits that as you're drawing back, it's going to cause your arrow to come off. Those are all things that come into play on how long of an arrow you need.
Do you adjust your broadheads whenever do you set your broadheads all the same way?
I do. Yeah, I want to leave in the same way. And, kind of like what you were saying earlier, I remember reading an article Randy Ulmer wrote years ago, and I read everything that he wrote. He's one of the guys I really look up to. But when he wrote it, it wasn't what I was finding to work for me. He was saying that you didn't need to line them up. Didn't make a difference. I was finding in the way I was doing things that I noticed inaccuracy. At 20 yards, 30, I didn't notice it. But when I started shooting broadheads at 60 to 80, 100, I was noticing a substantial difference getting that blade and my fletching to. And the biggest thing is to get it to lead the bow the same way every time. And, that can be no different if you're shooting a field tip, finding the high spine of the arrow or getting the spine to where it reacts the same every time.
Right.
Just by rotating your nock to get your groups to come together. I found everything came together quicker whenever I lined my broadhead up to where it left the same way every time. And it doesn't necessarily have to line up with your veins. It just needs to lead the same way every time.
So how do you do that? Do you hot melt your inserts in, or do you do it as you build the arrows? Or?
I do it as I build the arrows.
What if you? Okay, well, then getting to nock tuning. Do you nock tune
yes.
your arrows? So,
yes.
What if you set the broadheads like that, and then you have to find out you got to, or do you nock tune the arrows before you ever put a broadhead in, or what?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll nock tune, and I'll do that a lot of times with a bare shaft.
Okay.
So I'm rotating it to find the sweet spot, and I've got a spine checker, and I've floated arrows, and I've done a little bit of all the different voodoo stuff.
Right.
But at the end of the day, how it reacts out of the bow is that trumps everything.
Right.
If it's grouping and it's giving me the pencil holes with the bare shaft where they're all hitting exactly how I want them to. Then from there, I'm going to put on broadhead, and this is still a bare shaft. So now I've got my nock indicator of where I want it. Now I'm going to put my broadheads on, and I'm going to find a broadhead that's going to spin perfect every time, zero wobble. That's unacceptable to me. And then I'm also going to match some weights and things like that because I'm crazy when it comes to that stuff.
Well, that's a question coming up here in a minute.
But I find that it makes a difference, And then once I match out, and I may go through. It sounds crazy, but I may go through 24 broadheads to find 10 to 12 that will match up to the shafts that I'm working with right now.
Do you ever find that screwing a broadhead on, it'll screw on differently? I mean, where you want it turned a certain way, but then you take that broadhead off and put a different one on. Does it ever?
Yeah.
So you got to keep that broadhead to that arrow.
They're married now.
Yeah. Okay.
They're together.
Right.
They're together, and I once I've got that lined up, the blade hits the spine where I want it and everything, and the blade lines up how it should be. And G5 makes a little arrow squaring tool, so you can, if you're relatively close, you can square, shave off
right.
and especially if it's an arrow that's a little bit on the heavy side anyways, you can play around with it to get it to where they will marry up and work together. And then after that, that's when I fletch my arrows.
Okay.
I'm not saying everybody needs to be that
anal.
Yeah, crazy.
Well, you were talking about weight. How important is it for your shafts to weigh the same, and how much do you allow variance there, and how do you go about getting them the same weight?
I can. It depends on your abilities. I mean, if you want to really be honest with yourself, how well do you shoot, and what are you using the arrow for? If it's a 40-yard and in type deal, you could be 5 or 6 grains off, and most people can't shoot well enough to notice it.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm shooting
just
fixed blade broadheads at 120 for practice and confidence building before I go on a hunt, I want them within grain, half grain, really close. I get that picky, and I want them as close to
because you can put just a little bit too much glue on and add a grain, can't you? So.
Yeah, but you'd have to be that picky at that distance.
That's just it. And the thing is,
and for confidence reasons,
it's
if for nothing else.
And I'm not saying that anybody else in the world needs to be as anal as I am when it comes to that. But I know a lot of guys that are, and they do, and that's what gets them the best end result.
Right.
You know, you can't just go and buy crap broadhead, screw them onto, a gold tip expedition shaft and, a lower quality stuff and expect it to drill at 120. I don't care how well your bow is tuned. It may not be capable of doing that. It may not be capable of performing that well.
I know guys that shouldn't be shooting this stuff with a rifle at 120 yards, let alone a bow.
And I'm not saying you should be taking animals at that. That's a whole different game, and I have no desire. The whole idea for me personally, if you want to do that, that's on your conscience, not mine. At the end of the day, I want to be as close as I can get.
The farther away you practice, the better up close you're going to be.
Exactly, and that's why I do it.
You just hold on.
I practice long because that tells me about my tune and my form.
How you practice out to 120 or more than that?
That's about as far as I can get out of the sight that I use. And usually when I'm shooting that far, I'm actually taking my 5-pin sight off and I'm putting my slider on.
Okay.
And more than anything, once again, I'm checking my tune and my form.
Okay.
If I'm making a crap release, if I'm making a crap release, it's going to tell me. If I've got an arrow that isn't indexed just right, or if my knock fit on my serving isn't good, it's going to tell me at that distance.
Right.
And it'll make it that much more forgiving at 20 yards.
And that's another thing you offer if somebody wants custom built arrows, right?
Sure.
And how do you verify a spine?
Through my spine checker. And
if you want all of them to be the same spine, so somebody sends you like 3 dozen arrows or a couple dozen, or
no, and I've found that you'll get variances from one company to the. I can tell you some are really close, and some you get a pretty wide range, and
does it change as you spin the arrow around?
Oh yeah.
Oh come on, name names.
No, I won't name names because I don't think it's fair to the company because
it's not
because I'm going off of a hand. I may only get 6 dozen of XYZ shafts in a year, and I noticed that some of them there's a big variance. I think we talked about one that you were playing with, and the reason why I asked you is because I'd gotten some in from a fairly good shooter, and I was rotating, and it was they were expensive shafts, and they were some of the worst variances that I'd seen in a long time.
Shutting up now.
Yeah, well, but then again, since that time, I've gotten the exact same brand, same make, model, everything else, and they were pretty tight.
Pretty good.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, that's the world we live in.
Monday or Friday.
Well, maybe, yeah. Or, there are a lot of crazy things that affect stuff, I don't know so much about the carbon side of it. I wish I knew more, but, like say anodizing, the barometric pressure outside can change your colors. If that can happen, I'm sure, different variables are going to affect how the resins come together on certain days.
So do you find if you get the spines matched up that you don't have to knock tune as much?
Yes, but I'm not going to say that it is a stopping point. Okay. I still will check them. And if say the arrow you're holding right now, I personally like to fletch my stuff all the same color, and then I'm going to shoot at, this knock indication, and I'm going to see how it lands, how it groups. And then if it's not where I want it, I'll just rotate it to like that now. And then I'm going to shoot it and see it. And 9 times out of 10, that is going to fix the problem. I have found that sometimes with the arrow, even though I've indicated it on the high spine of the arrow, and usually I'll run high spine up. That's a good rule of thumb, but it's not an end all, and it doesn't necessarily mean just because it reacts great out of, say, your Hoyt, that it's not going to act the best out of an Elite or something because of some different variables.
Explain high spine.
The high spine is the stiffest part of the arrow. And basically what I'm doing whenever I'm checking for spine, I found the most accurate way. You can float them. You can do a couple different things. I've got a RAM spine indicator, and it's got a plunger gauge, and then I add a weight. I've got 2 points, and the arrow sets on those points, and then I hang that weight in the center of it, and that plunger gauge is there. And then as I rotate that arrow 360 degrees, I can watch that indicator, and it's going to change. And then, then I know what's the stiffest part. If it's not flexing as much, the less it flexes, the stiffer it is.
Okay. And you want the stiffest part of
it. Now, I will tell you that spine indicator, I want to say, is a couple $100.
Yeah, it's pretty expensive. I've looked at it.
It's fairly expensive. I wouldn't recommend it. Now, bow press and a couple different things. A draw board. I can take you to Lowe's and show you how to make a draw board for about $45. That's worth every penny.
Yep.
The spine checker, just rotate your nocks as you're shooting and number your arrows. And if you find a flyer, rotate it, and you'll find that it comes back together. That's a whole lot better. Your money's better spent on a draw board than.
Does it work to put a field point in each end of your arrow and crank it in your bow press and see where it bends, or does it bend?
I know the video you're talking about, and I would just soon not say.
Okay. All right. Enough said.
I haven't found that to be a very, because I saw that and I tried it, and in my findings, I didn't find that to be consistent. But I'm not going to say. Sometimes things can work for you, and you say that that's the way it is, and you believe that, but it doesn't always.
3 Fletcher 4.
It depends on your setup. Once again, what are you doing? What type of aim? How much twist are you putting on it? What are you doing with that arrow? What's your arrow speed? You take your expression. You're shooting 240s, 250,
247,
240 something. Yeah, right around 250. With that, and with the arrow weight that you were shooting and stuff. Man, if I was shooting field, I wouldn't be shooting 4 Fletch on there with a whole lot of twists, because it's going to start parachuting so bad at those long distances. Your groups are going to open up. You don't need as much correction. If you're shooting 270, 280s and up, I've been shooting 4 Fletch for long before it was popular. Everybody's, why are you doing that? Because it grouped really well with my broadheads. And what I did find is, even when I was shooting field tips with my groups were still better than 3 Fletch. As far as how I pick fletching, it depends on what I'm doing with it. It'd be different if I was shooting indoors. If I was setting up a bow specifically for indoor, I'd shoot a different fletch than if I was going to shoot a fixed blade broadhead. And that can even change whether I'm hunting whitetail deer or an elk or a moose or a coos deer, because those things are wired for sound. And if they hear anything, I want the quietest arrow going down range as I can find.
So is that a straight fletch then? Is there ever an instance where you should do a straight fletch?
Yeah, depending on the diameter of the shaft, and if you're shooting a blade rest, yeah. Then you need to. Mm-hmm. On average, I will tell you're better off getting some rotation. It's like throwing a knuckleball if you're not getting rotation. Now, the arrow will want to rotate naturally depending on how it comes out of the bow anyways. You can shoot a bare shaft, and there are a lot of different variables that cause it to rotate one direction or the other, but you can shoot it out of the shooting machine perfect every time, and I can tell you that you're going to get rotation even with no fletching on it at all. So I personally think you should be shooting at least an offset. I like to shoot about a 2-degree helical myself. I find that kind of works the best for me.
You should always shoot helical with broadheads, or is it very
I
with fixed blade anyway?
I won't say always, but
Yeah, there's
more
never
often than
always
not.
an archery.
That's just it. If you're shooting, say a 3 or 4 inch really stiff vein through a whisker biscuit, and you put a lot of twist on it, you're going to get some.
Not so much.
Yeah, it's not going to work very well.
Yeah.
But if you're shooting a drop away and you're not getting, and contact is not a factor, I think putting good rotation is going to definitely help you shoot tighter groups with broadheads, and field tips too.
What kind of fletching
I use that thing
use?
a lot.
That's a great one. Yeah,
It makes them all the same
bonding.
every time.
Yeah, I tell you, I tell people, and I don't sell them. It doesn't, and I'm not here to endorse nobody. But that Arizona Easy Fletcher for the mini blazers and stuff, that thing works. I can teach a kid to do it.
Yeah,
and they work.
Yeah,
and it gives you a good twist on it,
Yep.
and you're going to get pretty good flight. I would rather see a guy do that than buy most factory done fletching because it's set on there straight, and you're not getting any rotation at all. You're way better off.
Fletching choice.
Once again, it depends on
you need
what
to
I'm
read
doing.
it how I have it written.
I play with a
You're
lot
being
of different
abbreviated,
things.
Jack.
I have like a paragraph, and he takes it down to fletching choice.
Hey,
sorry, Doug. Go.
Kind of like what I said earlier. It depends on what I'm doing with the arrow. Probably my go-to. I've been doing the 4-fletch blazer, and I've had excellent luck. And that works well with whether I'm shooting a 3D. I can shoot indoor with it because it gives me a lot of control, and I can shoot fixed blade broadheads at distance, and it really works well.
The full size blazer, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
2-inch.
And I've played with the X's, the smaller ones, and I've done a lot with the Max Hunters, the AE Stealth, and played with those. They're a little bit longer. When I'm doing that, I'm looking to see what kind of control I'm getting. I'm looking to see how well it groups, and then also what it's doing in a crosswind. If I'm going antelope hunting, I don't want a big long vein to get affected.
In the wind.
Are y'all taking notes?
Well, I'm not saying to build your confidence it's good, but you need to know your equipment.
Right.
And
is there any secret to holding better in the wind?
don't practice it a ton, or it'll develop a lot of bad habits.
Right.
I'll shoot enough to know how my arrow's reacting, and sometimes I'll do that from shooting inside a controlled element and shooting out into the wind. That helps because then I know that on my end I did what I'm getting a truer read on what my arrow drift is. And I can tell you, I shot a 4-inch vein for a long time. That was kind of the standard. Whenever I switched to the blazer, I had to go to the 4-fletch to get the fixed blade broadheads to group as well. Because with the 3, even with the twist, it didn't quite hold the tight groups that I wanted or had come to expect with a fixed blade broadhead at long distances. But whenever I was shooting in the wind, I went from, close to a foot drift at 80, on about a 15-mile-an-hour crosswind to 1.5, 2 inches, which is pretty
That's
much
huge.
Yeah.
That's a big difference. Yeah. So, and that can, your shaft diameter, and it makes a difference, but I think that's marketed a little bit more, maybe.
Got
all kinds of goodies down here.
Man, I probably lost that.
What about preparing your arrow shafts and vanes for fletching? What do you do?
Depends on the shaft. Everyone's
You
a
go
little
by
bit
manufacturing specs, or
well, not necessarily. I'll go by the finish on it. Some of there for a while, I think it was Black Eagle and Victory had a super slick shaft. They were putting I think they called it ice or something. I know Victory had an ice finish, and man, there for a while you couldn't get a fletch to stick to that. You had to I had to rough it up, and I'd clean it with denatured alcohol, and say like a Full Metal Jacket. If you're not putting a wrap and stuff on it, you better rough it up a little bit to get it. And then I will vary my glue preference depending on the shaft too, because in the vein, some veins will react different to different glues. Some work better than others.
Same with the
I wanted a definite
axis.
answer.
I know you did, and I want to give you one, but the definite answer is there's not an exact.
What about taking veins off?
Taking veins off, I usually use a
razor blade.
Razor blade, and I found that a knife works a little bit better than a razor blade because a razor blade because it's such a fine edge you can gouge. Where with a dull hunting knife, I don't gouge into the carbon. And
Plus
the way the
carbon, plus it roughs it up.
It roughs it up a little bit, and
yeah.
it works good. That's kind of how I would.
What about cleaning the extra residue off?
You definitely, after you scrape it off, that's denatured alcohol in a clean cloth.
Okay.
Wipe it till it's clean and let it dry. You don't want anything that's any oil based because sometimes you can get a film on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here,
Like
Jack,
rubbing
you can,
alcohol
you can
doesn't
beat
work.
your head against the wall with that thing if you want.
Yeah, that's a nice tool you got, but it doesn't work. And it leaves glue everywhere. And
Whack!
It's
Well, we'll run through these next ones real quick, and Pib and Vinny can leave if they want because this is about Western hunting. So, and Bob and I are the Western hunters in here, and Doug.
Oh, God.
I can't
But-
leave.
You already talked about New Mexico. Did you draw any tags this
He's a
year?
Western hunter because he can't hang in ASA. Did I say that out loud?
that's probably why I do it. I haven't, as of yet, I haven't drawn anything.
There's still some coming up.
There's still Montana is my last hope. I got Nevada,
Montana for
sheep, goat, and Shires moose.
how hard are those to draw?
Really hard. I haven't drawn one yet. So I know I've been putting in as long as they've been doing points, which I want to say 14.
Montana
15 years.
screws their non-residents too, don't they? When it comes to that,
No, I mean, if we're going to talk about
That was opinionated.
Yeah,
Well,
if
I
we're going to
just
talk
heard
about loaded states, New Mexico, I don't agree with how they're doing things.
well, where anybody can draw any year.
Well, that
Or
doesn't bother me, but the number of non-resident tags is very limited, and that's pretty much every state out west. Which
Right.
I'm good with that, but there's goes another step farther that the guy, like how I do it, I'm going to do it all on my own. I want to draw a tag and I want to go hunting. Win, lose, or draw, it's on me, and I get a great sense of satisfaction. And if I don't, then I know I need to work on me. In New Mexico, they've made it to where they believe that you should have the Outfitters Association strong there. And
Isn't
you
it
have
the same in Wyoming?
Wyoming, yes and no. Wyoming, there are certain, like the wilderness areas, you can't go into there unless you've got a guide.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily agree with that. It's probably good for some, but I don't think it's good. I've met a lot of guides that probably didn't need to be in there too.
Yeah.
Truth be known. I mean, let's call a spade a spade.
Right.
Just because you have a guide's license doesn't mean, in Wyoming, actually, their guides are, it's a little bit harder to become a guide there than or an outfitter than other states. But New Mexico really ties your hands as a non-resident that you're talking decimal points now to have any chance as a non-resident, unguided hunter. Makes it pretty tough.
Yeah. So I see you have a bugling bull hat on. Is that the kind of elk calls you use? Or do you...
Yeah, actually, this Rocky Jacobson, it's a guy I know. He makes a phenomenal elk calls. Super nice guy. They changed the name of the company to Rocky Mountain Game Calls now because they do also.
So it's a retro hat.
Well, yeah, this is an old one. They do turkey calls, they do deer calls, and some things like that. So it's not just elk calls,
Right.
but he's known for his elk calls. He's a world champion. His son Corey is one of the best elk callers in the world. But as far as the latex that they use, the tapes work really well. I love their bugle tube. Been using it for years. It's the best that I've found. Now I will say that I use some other calls from other manufacturers too, but if you ask me just a ballpark, who makes the best stuff out there, I'd say Rockies without a doubt.
What's your favorite week to hunt?
Usually when I get asked that, it's like deer hunting.
Depends on where you're going.
Well, and there's a lot. Weather can play a big factor and stuff like that. But a good rule of thumb, if I'm hunting elk, I like to, like in Colorado, Idaho, Wyoming, something. If I can plan the middle of my trip around the 10th, it's usually really good.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and I don't. And some guys will say, "Well, that's crazy because that's muzzleloader season," and I don't mean to step on anybody's toes, but I will tell you, I've never had an issue with a muzzleloader hunter because they usually don't get too far from trailheads. And
That's what
on average.
That's the next question. You always backpack in, and how far? Do you usually always backpack?
Yes,
in?
yeah. 90% of the time, over 90% of the time, I'm backpacking in. There are certain situations like Arizona. Depending on the tag you draw, you can't always. There's not a place to really back into because there's road systems everywhere, and you're you're foolish to do that. Then I'll, set up a wall tent or whatever, and then I'll spike out from there and go to different drainages and hunt. But say if I'm going to Colorado or like this trip, I'm going to go to New Mexico. I know that area. I will backpack into a wilderness area, and it depends on where the elk are at. With that, I will tell you, if you've never hunted elk, most guys, they'll read in these magazines and they'll think that they need to go 5 to 15 miles back in. Mm-hmm. They have no concept of what it's going to take to get an elk out if they do get one.
Right.
They're probably going to run an elk if they haven't planned ahead of time. And for one guy to do that, I can pack out. Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, because that was the next question coming up here in a little bit is when you have a bull on the ground, how do you go about breaking it up to pack it out, and
if I bone it, whenever I break down an elk, I won't feel, if I'm going to, like if I shoot an elk late at night and it's cool.
Here, go ahead.
Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, I was wanting to know about game bags, knife, what especially if it's hot, how do you handle the meat and all that?
Okay. On average, I don't field dress the elk, especially if I'm going to break it down right then. And usually I will.
Yeah.
I don't, if I'm going to leave it overnight, it's because it's super late and it's cold and I've got a long way to get back and I've already got arrangements to get the elk out or something like that. If that's the case, I'll go ahead and field dress it. I'll move the guts away from the elk, and then I'll cover the elk up. I'll usually leave some clothes and stuff on it because of bears, coyotes, whatever. And I found I've never lost an animal that way. Uh-huh. I've done it a handful of times. Usually I'll go ahead and at least break it up and hang it up, and I will move the gut pile away. And I found that those type of animals they're going to go the guts first anyways, it seems like.
Yeah.
If I leave it close, they will get into the meat. I've seen guys do that. I personally haven't, but I've seen it happen. But if you move the guts away, the animals are going to go to that. And then, but usually what I'll do what they've now termed the gutless method, but I'll skin the quarter back and I'll take that quarter off. One thing that I do carry, and I think I gave it in that list that that cheap drop cloth that you get for painters.
Yeah.
Super thin mill. It comes, it's about the size of your wallet. It doesn't weigh anything. I'll lay that out. That way, whenever I'm breaking that elk down, I'll lay that meat on there. And that keeps it clean.
Right.
And then I'm going to go ahead and bone it out, and I'll put it in a game bag immediately. And then I'll hang it up, get it off so the air can circulate around it.
Right.
Then I'll go to the next quarter. I'll take that one off. Usually I'll do the front quarter first, depending on how the elk's laying. You don't have to do it one or the other. I'll do front, back. Then I'll take the back strap and the loin.
Yeah.
I'll get that, and then I'll roll the elk over. And then I'll do the same on the other side. And then once I've got that, I'm going to take all the neck meat and things like that and rib meat and stuff, put that in my bags. When I do it that way, elk, kind of like deer and everything else, one elk is bigger than another. Mm-hmm. But on average, I can get an elk boned out like that in 3 trips myself.
Okay.
Would not recommend that for everybody.
Right.
And if you're not accustomed to packing, weight, it's not a good idea. If it takes you 7 trips safely, you're way better off than blowing a knee out because you tried to put too much.
Right.
Walking sticks, hiking sticks makes a big difference. Makes it easier to carry a heavy load on uneven terrain.
Yeah.
But that's kind of my rule of how I normally will break down an elk.
Okay.
And that works for deer and stuff too.
Then do you take it to a local processor, or do you bring it home and do it yourself, or what?
It depends on what my plan is. I have taken it to processors out west, and it is cheaper if you're going to do it out west, usually than, say, bringing it back to Missouri and taking it somewhere. But I'll usually do it myself. I'll take it somewhere and have them freeze it. And if I don't have time, if I'm going to another hunt or need to get home for family reasons, whatever, I'll just get dry ice. Yeah. And I'll make sure the meat, you want to make sure the meat's cool before you ever put it in a cooler to begin with, if you can. Cool your coolers, whether that's putting ice in it before I go back in. So at least I've got ice and melted water and stuff in there whenever I get back.
Right.
I'll drain all that out because you don't want water on your meat. But I'll dry that out. Then because the inside of the cooler is now cold, I'll put the meat in. Then I'll put a layer and put some dry ice and pack it. And usually by the time, anywhere from 14 to 24 hours whenever I get back, depending on whether I'm in Idaho or Colorado or whatever, that meat is really cold. So that's how I do it.
Okay. What's your favorite method of getting a bull in range, or does it change with each bull? Or
it changed with each, but kind of like turkey hunting. I would love to say I can sit there and call one in every time, and they come in and screaming. And that's what you dream about, but that's not always the case. I'm going to play by what the bull's doing. If he's moving in a certain direction and I can cut him off, that's a pretty smart way to play it.
Yeah.
And I have found whether you're calling elk, turkey, moose, whatever, if you get to where they want to be and call, you can be a fairly subpar caller. They'll come to you.
Do you spend more time trying to figure out where they're going then, or to some areas you just not have time to do that?
Sometimes you don't have time to do that. Sometimes you don't have the visibility to do it, things like that. I like to sneak up on stuff. That's fun. But if I had my pick, I love calling them in. Mm-hmm. When I can get an animal to do something, when I'm talking its language, you get a connection with them, and that trips my trigger. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, and if you haven't done it, you don't. It may not make sense.
You ought to be great at hunting. You're the turkey whisperer. You ought to be great at hunting elk, Bob.
I was going to ask on checking your wind and everything else on Zillow. You constantly check your wind and your thermals and stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. Coming from here, we will have some rotation, but we get fairly consistent winds.
Right.
And they think, okay, once the wind's coming this one direction, you're pretty much there for the day, or a big part of the day for the most part.
Depending on how high you are on the ridge.
Yeah, I mean, there's some variables. But out there, you got thermals. And then you've also got bowls and eddies and things. It's kind of like water in a creek. You can watch how it rotates. That's how wind acts. Structure can change what the wind's doing. Up on top of a ridge, it's blowing really consistent. You drop down into a bowl, and it can be swirling like crazy. And then you got thermals. As the sun's rising, it heats up, so things start going up. But before that time, it's still the air's cool, so it's still dropping down. Yeah. So you've really got to pay attention to it. And I would love to tell you that I don't ever get busted by the wind elk hunting, but anybody that tells you that, I don't care what spray they're using or what suit they're wearing or what ozonics box they've got there lying to you, because it doesn't.
So do you try to get ahead of them in the morning, or above them in the morning then? And
as a rule of thumb, yes.
Yeah.
When I'm hunting Colorado and in steeper areas, Arizona, not as much. I've seen elk, I actually feed on tops and then drop down into the deep canyons and stuff in Arizona, because the structure is just different. But on average, in say a place like Colorado, in the high country, definitely they're usually going up of an evenings, unless there's fields and things like that can change.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest mistake a new elk hunter makes? Did you just address that with the wind, or?
Probably the wind. If you're doing it on your own, having the wrong equipment, not having boots that fit, not being mentally prepared would be a big one. If you're going on an outfitted hunt, not shooting from odd angles, not knowing how to set up for the shot, putting too much stuff in front of you, and then limiting your ability to shoot when the animal comes in. Setup is a big thing, and some of that just comes with experience. And that plays to turkey hunting. If you can kill turkeys with, on a consistent basis, it's a lot. There are a lot of similarities.
In bear country, go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to say, a friend of mine that does a lot of elk hunting. He'd always tell me, you need to come with me or something. Says it's just like turkey hunting when your turkey's 1,000 pounds or whatever, and he comes in and screams right in your face.
Yes, and when you ask what's my favorite way to hunt them or what's my strength, I would, and this sounds crazy, I would rather shoot a 300 and whatever bull coming in screaming. I get more of a rush than sitting over a water hole having one or coming to a field and shooting a 400-inch bull.
Yeah.
Now, I would love to, You know, everybody wants one of those big bulls. But as far as I've shot enough of them or enough elk now that what I really love is that interaction with them.
Right.
And if I can get them to call and work them that way, there's no higher high to me.
Yeah. In bear country, sidearm or bear spray?
What kind of bear country?
Grizzly.
Grizzly?
A slow runner partner.
It depends on how proficient you are with that handgun. Because let's be honest, most people haven't shot them enough. And in a stressful situation, even I was in law enforcement, and you'd take guys that were pretty good shots, real good shots, and then you put them in when the bullets are flying, they can't hit anything.
Yeah.
You know, some people can, some people can't. So you got to be honest with yourself. I think a handgun can work great. At the end of the day, if there's any question in that ability, you're way better off with a bear spray because you got a wider spray. Mm-hmm. The only thing is you don't want to spray it when the wind's blowing to you, and you don't want to spray it.
Oh, I got it
too soon. Most people they'll get out of spray before the bears even to their fog.
Have you ever had to spray one?
I've never had to spray one.
Do you carry it though?
I've carried it. Yes, Idaho. I was hunting along Yellowstone, and what they were doing in this one place, they were trapping problem grizzly bears and then dropping them off over where I was at. And those bears, because they're out of their element, they can get kind of nasty. And I carried spray there. Carried it in Wyoming one time in a place because they had a pretty high density. When I'm hunting in New Mexico, Colorado, places like that where there are black bears, I don't carry it.
You don't carry it in black
How do you
and
know?
I'm not saying you should or shouldn't. If it's your comfort level.
How do you know if you can or you can't?
You read the proclamation.
I mean,
you
said some guys. Yeah. How do you? I mean, you take a gun, you get 8. Well, I can't.
Well,
I mean,
how fast can you draw that? Sprint 20 yards, draw your pistol, and try to hit a small object.
Sprint 20
yards. Sprint 20 yards. Okay, you tell me you're going to be more out of breath sprinting 20 yards than you are with a grizzly bear charging, and you know your life's fixing to end.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, and that's what I mean. It's and I don't say that to be macho. You've got to know your limitations, and if you're not that guy, if you're not second nature with that handgun, that weapon, it's really just a noisemaker, and it's not going to stop a bear that is determined. It's not going to stop them. That boom, once some it might, but if you've got that one that's hell bent on getting you.
You don't care about that.
And the thing is even if you're hitting him, but you're not breaking it down, you're shooting the wrong kind of bullet, and you're not hitting where you need to, it's not going to do you. You're way better off probably using the spray.
I was going to say something that'll stop a grizzly bear. Not everybody can shoot that anyway.
Well,
I mean, and you're not shooting it with a little 380 or 9mm.
No, you're better off having a whistle.
Yeah.
And always save one bullet for yourself.
Yeah.
You might as well just use it.
Yeah. You in that case, you're way better off a spray.
I mean, because it takes pretty much a cannon to.
And a cannon put in the wrong spot isn't going to stop it. It's not going to break it down. You know. So
I think spray.
Spray is probably, as a rule of thumb.
But you don't worry about it in black bear country.
No, and I have ran into some black bears that. One in Colorado for sure. Got in between sow and some cubs. That was pretty exciting.
Yeah. You need a cough? So what about your food? Do you take care of your food the same way in bear country, black bear or grizzly?
Yes. I don't want my food around camp. I don't eat around camp. I don't even brush my teeth around camp.
Really?
Yeah, I'll move away. Not crazy far, but I'm gonna get a little bit of distance. I carry a mesh bag. It doesn't weigh anything, and some cordage, and I package all my food in Ziploc bags, and I ration it out for my daily allowance. And so it's weatherproof, and then I put it in that mesh bag, and I'll hang it up in a tree.
How far away?
It depends. If I'm in black bear country, 40, 50, 60 yards somewhere.
Yeah.
If I'm in grizzly country,
Get it away.
Miles.
yeah, a quarter mile maybe.
Yeah.
A couple 100 yards.
What's your approach to water in the backcountry as far as bladders, Nalgene bottles, filters? How do you?
I've done the iodine tablets. That's not that's a lifesaver. I carry them still, but I'm not going to use that as my sole source of water because it tastes like crap. I use a water pump, and I like to carry a bladder with me all the time because when you're running and gunning, you're calling and you're getting out of breath, and you can get dry real quick. You'd be amazed that little shot of water can keep you going. Yeah. And it can also keep you from coughing and things like that when you feel the tickle in your throat. Back at camp, I always have an Nalgene bottle. I like to, have some electrolytes and stuff of an evening usually. And then even at night, as I'm sleeping, you'll wake up. It's hard to keep hydrated. And at night, you'll wake up, and if my mouth's dry, I'm taking some water because I want to get as much in my system as I can for the next day. Because first couple of days, you're probably not going to notice it much, but over, week to 10 days or longer, it'll catch up with you if you don't. And then that's where guys get altitude sickness a lot of times. They'll start getting bad headaches and things because they don't keep hydrated.
So are you looking for water sources before you walk in?
Yeah, I'd like to try to have them located, I've been in a few places. I got in Alaska one time, and I was on a Dall sheep hunt, and I went a day and a half without water. And that was because I was on a sheep, and the water was, you're up in the shale slides and stuff like that. It's nasty. There's no water up there. The sheep are even having to drop down to get to it. And where we were at, because of the situation, and it was my own lack of planning and stupidity. I just stayed up there and tried to tough it out, and then actually got super dehydrated, and it wasn't the smartest thing I've done. Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it.
Right.
Water, you can do without food. You can't do without water.
Yeah.
For very long. And it's hard to function without it.
Yeah. I know something that scares him or makes him worry. What do you do for Bigfoot protection, like chupacabra protection?
I found that the pepper spray usually works pretty good. And I ask, my cojones out of my wife's purse before I leave. Because that usually...
He takes Jack Links with him.
So I'm okay to go camp by myself without Sasquatch?
Well, I can't tell you you're okay driving home tonight.
Yeah.
Honestly, the odds of you getting in a wreck, seriously, the odds of you getting in a fatality accident on your way home tonight from right now are 100 times higher than getting attacked by a bear when you're out there.
You could hit Bigfoot.
Yeah.
And the odds of getting killed by a Bigfoot, you'd be the first. You'd be my hero.
That's true.
They'd talk about you for years.
So I want that, I guess.
If you don't shave, one might mate with you.
Well, we were talking to Jeremy Scotton from Danner Lacrosse a couple weeks ago, and he said he got smacked by a bear while he was sleeping. It smacked him in the head, cold-cocked him.
Yeah.
He thinks the only thing it was it was walking by his tent at night, and he started snoring, and it startled him or something.
Yeah, I was up in Idaho hunting elk, and I had a friend with me, and I'd been on an antelope hunt, a mule deer hunt. I'd already shot an elk in Colorado, and then I was up in Idaho hunting elk. So I'd been for 30 days hunting my butt off. I mean, nonstop. I was worn out, and I guess I was snoring pretty loud. And during that same time, the moose are breeding.
Yeah.
And my buddy, I woke up to the sound of some metal hitting a pot, clank, clank, clank. I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, every time you snore, that moose gets closer. And it's wah, wah. And he was scared to death.
Like, what do you got a pan for? Get your bow.
Yeah, you're 7 foot tall. He's a big guy. There shouldn't have been. But fear is real, and you got to know and I won't bag on anybody. If you're, I know some guys that they have issues with dark and stuff like that. If you're prepared and if you've got confidence in what you carry with you, what's the difference whether and the same guy actually, because I noticed he was always back at camp an hour before, and he's missing the best time to be hunting.
Right.
And in the mornings he would leave because he knew it was going to get light and he was okay. But of an evenings, he had to be in camp well before the sun went down because that was just his comfort level. And finally, I'm like, Kevin, everything you have and everything you need is you've got in your pack.
Yeah.
You've got an emergency blanket. You've got a fire starter. We're not having a fire back at camp. So you've actually got more with you now than what you will back at camp. He goes, well, I've got that tent, and that's a false sense of security, too, because that bear, that's a candy wrapper to a bear. Yeah. If it really wants in there, that nylon tent's not going to stop nothing.
Yeah.
So, and once he got over it, he was fine. But that initial, and fear's real. If you're not comfortable, don't go too far out of your comfort zone, but also try to expand it as much as you can.
Yep.
My son's scared to death of coyotes and owls.
Yeah, and how many people have been, attacked by either?
Yeah.
But if you're
Winnie
you're
the
scared,
Pooh
you're scared.
movie, the Tigger movie, there was an owl scared the soup out of him, and when he was little bitty, he still hates owls.
My son's 6'2", at about 280, 290, hunts a bunch. But I guarantee you, if it's a half hour before dark and we're out in the stands and coyotes start yelling, he's down and out. I mean, no matter what, just because when he was about 4 years old, we were camping and we were laying there and the coyote started hollering pretty close, and he asked his dad, says, well, coyotes hurt you? Nah, I don't have to worry about them. Says, they'll just hurt little boys in tents.
Oh, nice.
Oh, man.
Now he's 30-some years old.
There you go.
So let me ask you a question, Doug. Why not a campfire in camp?
I will occasionally, if I find, I do a lot of hunting by myself. If I find my morale, if I'm missing home, and I'll be the first to admit, I don't care who you are. You got other issues if you can go for that long and not miss your wife and kids and things like that. So there are times when I'm feeling feeling lonely, depressed, and things aren't working. I may light up a fire, but I know whenever I do that, I'm educating the animals in my area. And part of the reason why I go back in and my strategy on how I hunt is I don't want the animals to know I'm there, and a campfire
Gotcha.
can let them know. So I'm trying to make the least amount of impact as I can. So I don't do fires very often. But
so like around here for, like whitetail hunting here in the Midwest, I mean, the smoke, they're so used to it around here. It's something fairly common. It's not as common out there for them, is what you're saying?
Yeah, and, there's obviously, fires and forest fires and campers and things. But I've seen it move elk out of areas. You get a camp and they're burning stuff, that smoke smell and everything, and it can cause elk to relocate. And that can be, the country's so big out there, you can be in an area with a ton of elk sign, but the elk just aren't there.
Yeah.
And you've got to find them. And turn and look 360, it could be a lot of miles before you catch back up with them. So I do everything I can, especially when I'm hunting a specific animal. If I find what I'm really looking for, man, I just can't risk.
You don't want to bugger him up.
Yeah, and that goes to whitetail hunting too.
Right.
So do you have cameras out yet?
Yeah. Going to go up to Iowa this weekend and put a few more up.
Well, I hunt right here in town, not far from the house here, as everybody knows. And there used to be a spot across the road over here where I think I could have got away with. I'd actually probably been better off with some Old Spice on, because it's right off the golf course. I've watched those deer not pay any attention to those golfers.
Yeah, and that's just it. It varies from place to place.
When you're trying to not smell like anything, you smell like, oh, he ain't right.
Yeah.
There was some good bucks up there for a while, and then they put Liberty North High School in, too.
Right.
Pib's the only guy I know that's got a climbing tree stand with a dusted on light on it.
Well, hey, Doug, I appreciate you taking so much time with us tonight. Why don't you tell everybody how they can get a hold of you? And
you can always call me. My number is 816-885-7599. I answer the phone pretty much every time. If I don't, leave your name, number, and a short message, and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. You can also reach me. I'm not the best on Facebook. I'll be the first to admit. But if you get me, I will get back with you within a day or two. And then you can reach me on my website, www.chasearchery.com.
And so they still got a little bit of time. This is the middle of June.
Sure.
Before you shut it all down.
Yeah, he'll get your arrows made.
Yeah. No, I'll get everything taken care of, especially if you give me a little bit of notice.
Yeah.
We'll get everything. Like
And
I
if people are from out of state, can they come visit you too?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I get those. I shipped 4 bows today from one to Utah, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota.
Sweet.
So, yeah.
Do you guys have anything else?
No, sir.
All righty.
Have you got any big ones on camera yet?
I haven't even checked them yet. I'm not a big... Cameras are a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, I'll put them out. I've already got a pretty good idea of what I'm after anyways, so it's more of a just to see what I can see, but I won't check them, honestly, until I get ready to leave to go out west. I'll check them one time, I'll pull them, and depending on the area, I might put a couple more out as the season progresses, but I'm not the guy that checks them all the time.
That's shooting yourself in the foot.
I think so. Yep.
I know that I'm the type of guy that if I put a camera out, every other day I want to check it. I got to tell myself, don't do it.
You just got to leave them alone because
now,
there are some places that you can drive to it and jump out, check it. If there's a lot of traffic like that,
right,
it's probably not going to affect their pattern. But if you're way back into a bedding area where that's their sanctuary and they feel comfortable, and you're going in and out,
that's not the bedding area anymore.
You just cut your odds.
See, I'd much rather get on top of a hill and glass them from a couple hundred yards away.
That's how I do a lot of it.
But I usually wind up having pictures of bucks that I never wind up seeing anyway, so I have more fun running a camera than I do shooting at them.
Yeah, and right now, a lot of times, if you're putting them on a food source and stuff, those deer may be a mile away.
Yeah.
When they're hard horn and ready.
Easy.
When you can hunt them.
Yep.
We always get depressed because in my area, we got smaller bucks and does all the way up until the 1st of November, and then the big bucks all move in.
I know a lot of guys that'll quit hunting because they're not getting good pictures.
Yeah.
But they'll leave the cameras out, and then after season, they'll pull them, and they're like, oh, my, I didn't even... Because they get depressed. They're so dependent. They're a great tool, but they're not the end all.
And they always start showing up, and they'll be at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And then by the time the rut starts, you'll start seeing them during the daytime.
See, I've got it. I usually put a camera on a salt die-cal, lick, and I really get the real nice bucks and stuff. And probably first part of July, they'll start hitting it real hard, and they'll use it maybe a week after they drop their velvet, but then they're gone. Then they don't come back to it. But boy, I get some really nice pictures before they start dropping their velvet. But
this time of the year, mineral works really good.
And I know we don't have much time to talk, but I wanted to talk to you about the chronic waste disease that they're talking about in Missouri, because Carroll County, where I live, that was one of the counties that was added to they took away the 4-point restriction, and no salt licks. No, they don't want you to feed them.
Yeah,
they don't want any of that stuff. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, because I have mixed feelings on everything that they're doing.
I think it's a really scary situation, and I think, so it's like trying to be politically correct. I personally think, that a lot of the pin deer and the breedings and the things like that can introduce disease for sure. And anytime you're putting out mineral and you're concentrating deer, if one's got it, that's going to cause more to get it. It can cause issues. I don't think they necessarily know exactly what to do to contain it.
Well, I have a problem with them. They're saying chronic waste disease is going to, completely wipe out the herd, or have a potential to, and their way to fix it is to wipe out the herd, because
I don't think that's a
part of Sheraton County over there.
Look in Wisconsin, Minnesota, some other places that have had it, and they've tried that in counties, and it hasn't necessarily been successful either. So I don't. Sometimes when something scares you so much, you'll try about anything, and I think that's
where we're at.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, over in Sheraton County, supposedly it came from that high-fenced area up there around Ethel, Missouri. But Sheridan County's been in that for a long time. And it wasn't Swan Lake. It's another one right on up there. But they went in and, they would basically saying shoot anything and everything. Yeah. Every deer in there, they wanted it shot.
And then when they test those, not all of them have it. And I don't.
And I'm not sure they've ever really 100% found one in Sheridan County that had chronic waste disease.
Well, and they have that out west with elk too. In Colorado, there are places where, you can send in brain material and they'll check it.
See, now all the taxidermy shops are supposed to take a brain sample when they come in
and like if I shoot a deer in Kansas, you're supposed to totally break it down and have everything, and still call and make before you bring it in. And if you don't know those things,
ooh,
and then it starts getting real scary because that can be, if they want to push it, because you're transporting across state lines, and it can become a Lacey Act, and it can be really scary. Just be careful what you're doing and try to.
When I killed my antelope in 2013, I called on the way back as I was driving across Kansas, and they said, "No, you don't need to have an antelope checked." So
okay, then just as long as I'm covered. And the sad thing is, you could talk to a person and
but
say you don't.
An elk or a deer, you do. Yeah. So
the antelope's too fast.
I guess.
Well, that's just it. And the thing is the person that you talk to, they might not even know the rule sometimes, but you're still on the hook for it.
Yeah.
In case you didn't know.
I have an opinion, but I'm not going to talk about it on the podcast.
So
that's
we're splitting this into two. Okay. So if you got something else and Doug's okay with it, go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering how you felt about the I've taken the 4-point rule off, or what you thought about the 4-point rule, or
initially, for me personally, I like the 4-point rule, but I don't think it applies to everybody. And if we're really wanting to build 100 numbers, I don't know that that's the way to do things. I think if you got a kid or if you've never shot a deer before, and
I want to shoot the first thing that pops out.
I remember back before you could shoot does and stuff. When I was a kid, 3 inches, that's all I was looking for.
Yep.
To say I shot to kill a deer.
Yep.
And I was just as proud of a little forkhorn or a deer like that. And who are you or anybody else to say that is wrong? I think that is what gets lost with the TV side of it and stuff. And yes, I do hunt for a certain age class of an animal, but I've been doing it a long time, and I do it for other reasons.
It's a progression.
It is, and it needs to be. You don't need to be teaching a young kid that he needs to shoot 150-inch deer his first year, because that can take the fun clean out of it. And if he's as excited,
how many kids during youth season have gone out and shot 180-inch deer off the bat, and for the rest of their life? What's the odds of them attaining that again?
Is that really what it's? And not to get on a soapbox, but is that really what it's all about?
No.
It should. And if it is for you, honestly, I feel sorry for you to some extent, because you're missing the boat. And I will be the first to admit that there was a time when I was in my 20s where it was for me. Mm-hmm. Because that number meant everything to me, and it took the fun clean out of hunting.
Yep.
And I'll be honest, the big reason why I was doing part of it was because I wanted to show you and everybody else it was an ego thing.
Right.
And that's the wrong way to approach it, because if you don't love it for what it is, and if you can't enjoy it, and if you want to shoot a forkhorn and it makes you happy, or a 1.5-year-old 8-pointer, little basket rack or 6-pointer or whatever. So
sorry, Bob.
I know a guy that saw a 6-pointer and this guy shot 170-inch deer. He goes, frame-wise, it was as big as that.
Yeah.
Yep.
But didn't shoot it because technically
wasn't legal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've lost friends over deer hunting, over that numbers thing, and over that.
And
it's man, I'd rather have that friend back.
How many? And everybody's different, but I don't really like showing pictures anymore. I don't, because then it becomes a competition, and some people will, they look at it and they're like, man, I didn't shoot. So they feel less about what they're doing, which I don't want that to happen. Or they get jealous, and then they start saying you're doing something wrong or different.
Right.
I don't hunt anywhere you or anybody else couldn't go if they wanted to go.
Well, so. I've got my oldest son's 2 boys. The younger one was in 3rd grade, I think it was. Or maybe he killed a buck in 3rd grade. And he goes to a small school right over in Sheridan County, Minden. And so almost all the boys in his class hunt. I mean, that's just what they do. And the next year, we were hunting and stuff, and he didn't see a buck, so he didn't shoot anything. And I told him, I said, Zach, why don't you go ahead and shoot a doe? No, I'm not going to shoot a doe. So then had the youth season where it was doe only, and I told him he was at home. I was going to go bow hunting. I said, Zach, why don't we just go and you can take the gun and you can shoot a doe and he said, Grandpa, I'm not shooting any does. I said, well, why not? He goes, because last year, and he said the boy's name in his class, shot a doe. All the rest of us shot bucks. And we teased him terrible for shooting a doe. And, I'm not going to do it because I'm not going to get teased. I said, Zachary, that's not what it's all about, and everything else. But he wasn't going to do it. And it was peer pressure in 3rd and 4th grade.
Yep.
And that happens in 3D archery and everything else.
Yes, it does.
So whenever you can finally come to the conclusion that what everybody else does or thinks, or you got to make you happy. And if shooting a doe or shooting a small buck or holding out for a giant buck and you don't get one, if that's what you want, that's what you should do. And if you're doing it just to impress or then
your heart's not in the right place.
And it's going to take away, and eventually you're going to stop doing it. How many guys do you know that they enjoyed shooting 3Ds, but then they weren't shooting as good as the next guy, so they were comparing themselves to you, and they couldn't get to that level, whether they didn't know what it took, or sometimes it's just flat ability or whatever the reason. They never got to there. They enjoyed archery until they started worrying about what you were doing. Now they can't get to there, and it took the fun out of it, and then they quit altogether. That's sad.
I can tell you more than one.
I can too. I mean, we all can. You stop and think about it. There's a lot. That happens a lot. And it's sad, and it's not helping the sport.
No, and I can tell you personally that I've done it long enough now that it can become a job, and that can take the fun out of it. Yeah. And you have to find a way to bring it full circle and put the fun back in it in order to stay doing it and for it to really mean what it means.
I did it with archery, whether you're shooting for a company and stuff, that there's that pressure of you need to perform and stuff like that. I did it with deer hunting, and at the end of the day, I enjoy shooting 10 times more than I did when I shot my best, just going and having fun. I want to do the best I can.
Oh, you always do.
Yeah, and whether that lands me in 1st or 50th, as long as I felt like I shot well, that's how I judge it. If I hunt hard and I get a deer that I'm after, I don't care what it scores.
You got it done.
Yeah.
And it used to be for me. It used to be that it's got to score this, or I want it to score that, and now I'm more into I beat him at his game. That's the part that I like now over the rack, the whatever. So
I've had, not last year, because last year I didn't have it, but the year before, one day I had 3 different deer come through, and I could have killed the first one, and he would have been a deer that 10 years before I would have killed. Mm-hmm. I let him go. And the other 2, and the third one, I actually grunted at him. He came down and started raking a tree, and I grunted at him. And he threw his head up, and he came back up and stood right there, and he had a broken tine. That was my excuse for not shooting him. Beautiful deer. Had good time calling him up there. But if I'd have shot the first one, I'd have never seen the other 2. But my problem is I'm old enough now, and I hunt by myself, that after I shoot one, then it really becomes work.
Go elk.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I probably won't. But I have a hard time making myself shoot one, because I enjoy watching them anymore. I know I'm starting to feel sound like a
tree hugger yuppie thing that goes to Jack's store all the time.
Hey, don't knock REI.
but I really do, and the best part about it is my wife is really fantastic about that stuff, because when I'll get up to go hunting and she'll say, "You staying out all day?" Which she knows I probably will. She says, "Well, don't kill one today, because I don't feel right, and I don't have all the stuff. I don't want to help you cut one up." Because we've always done it ourselves, and she's always helped.
Anyway.
I go, and she go, but just don't kill one,
Yeah.
And if I happen to kill one and come home early, she says, "I thought I told you not to kill one," but I have more fun going out, or as much fun anymore. Like you said, calling deer. I have a tough time rattling them. I for some reason I can't rattle them, but I can grunt deer up. Snort wheeze. The best part about it is the snort wheezing with your own, and having one react and come in.
That's the last.
It's almost as good as calling in a turkey, almost.
Yeah.
And so, but plus when I kill one, then and I put a picture on Facebook or something showing that I've actually went hunting, then Jack or somebody will always say it would have been a nice one next year.
Where did we?
Oh
get
no! Where did we get that?
Where did this
oh man! Here we go. Here we go.
What's the origins of it? Would have been a better one.
That would have been this goes clear back to the ASN days, archersite.net. To my very first one that I put on there, and the first guy that comments on the post says, "It's a nice deer, but he would have been better next year."
Yeah, he'd been a real nice deer next year. And it's not as it's the truth.
Now Bob's paying for it because he's the only one that ever kills a buck anymore, and so we all get to say,
yeah. And there's about 15 guys pile
and
on.
I can tell you this too: he better be a nasty old warrior for me to shoot him on a Sunday night.
You having a heart? You okay? Mm-hmm. You gripping your chest? You sure?
No does on a Sunday night. No marginal ones. He's got to be the man on a Sunday night to be worth putting the work in, because I got to be to work Monday morning.
Depends on what the weather is, because I'll hang my deer, for quite a while if I have to. But if not, I'll cut them up and put them down in the basement on ice in a big tub. And,
there's been a few hung on that hook.
But no, I have as much fun, and I have a really nice place to hunt too. My little sister and brother-in-law have a really nice farm, and that's all it's good for is hunting. I mean, basically. And I take advantage of it.
Yeah.
But Vinny's took advantage of it a few times, and Pib just won't get out of bed in time to come up and go with me. But
I've never been asked.
I tried to get you. I tried to get the south end of the farm for you to release.
I know
some other guys a couple of times, but I have a problem whether there's a rich doctor that has bought the center part of the farm, and his favorite part to hunt is the south end.
It's because
keep working on that.
Anyway.
All you got to do is ask, Bob.
I know. I will.
I'll come help you drag.
I don't want you to come up and make fun of my stand placements.
You got you got an extra boat strap?
Yeah,
okay,
no.
We're good.
We'll have to share it.
We don't have an issue there.
But on the 4-point rule, I know, guys, I'm dragging stuff out, but I was outside for a while.
Like I said, it's going to be a two-parter. As long as
my big problem with the 4-point rule is they want you to kill the ones that are 4-point or above, and I've seen a lot of deer come back in the back of a pickup that were year-and-a-half old 10-pointers.
Yeah.
And I asked conservation agent one time, what's the purpose of that? And he said, well, we want to start trying to get the deer to get older and grow more trophies. I said, well, then you're killing all the potential trophies.
Move gun season out of the rut.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But I think that saves. How it saves more deer than anything is you have to stop and look now. More so during gun season than bow season. You have to pay a little more attention about what you're shooting. You're not just seeing a flash with some horn on it and start blasting away. Is it a perfect system? No. But not everybody knows how to age deer. Anybody can be fooled by a deer to begin with. Counting that number is going to help. And at the end of the day, if you're shooting a 1.5-year-old 8-pointer or 10-pointer or 12-pointer, which grinds you a little bit, is it helping the herd? No. Is it messing with that trophy potential? Yes, definitely shooting a 1.5-year-old 12-pointer. But if it makes that guy really happy and that's what he gets the enjoyment out of, and now he's not fighting against what we want to do, that's a pretty good thing. And I can live with the downside to that. Now, if he shoots it and he goes, I shouldn't have shot that little piece of crap, and that you want to see me get hot, that will. But
yeah, the doctor that owns the middle part, he trades hunts with guys down in Florida and Mississippi and different things. Mm-hmm. So when they'll come up, and I saw one of you talking about a 1.5-year-old 12-pointer. Mm-hmm. He was a really nice deer, and I could have threw him over my shoulder and carried him out. I mean, he had potential like you wouldn't believe, and but I mean, he was dead. Couldn't put him back on. So, yep. But yeah, like I said, if they're super happy with it, that's
you just got.
But there's not very many 1.5-year-old 12-pointers.
I had a friend. He shot he came to hunt with me in Kansas, and it's public land. It's not like I own it or anything. And he shot a deer, and I met him, and he was so excited. And this guy has killed a lot of stuff. And I mean, he was shaking excited. And I go, "What'd you get?" And he's telling me about a 140-inch 8-pointer. And I'm thinking, okay, I bet I know what deer it is. And we get over there, and it's a 115-inch 10-pointer, but it's got like 4.5, 5-inch G4s. It's got a frame, but it is literally no bigger than my pinky. 12-inch, maybe 12-inch inside spread, but genetically just
going to be a moose.
Built to score in 2 or 3 years. Literally, mm-hmm. he was. If there was ever going to be a booner, he was probably going to be it.
Right.
But he was
dead. Mostly, he was just dead.
He was dead, and once the excitement wore off, I was cool with everything in that situation. But he was like, "Yeah, I probably shouldn't have shot that one." I'm like, "Well, but if it made you that happy and that excited,
yeah,
isn't that really what we do it for?"
Right. Exactly.
So learn from it, and the next time you may take a second before you shoot one. Right. And then, you can grow and learn from it. Yeah. Don't, I'm not going to look down on what you did, because that deer could have got hit by a car or ate by a coyote or caught in a fence or
ate by a Yeti.
Yeah. I mean, Bigfoot could have caught him.
Bigfoot could have got him.
They do. They follow the whitetail herd.
They do.
They're like, oh, well. Anything else, Bob?
I'll shut up now.
Preach it, Bobo.
According to the conservation department, there is not a breeding population of Bigfoot.
One day you will be proved wrong. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that. So we better end it right there. We've kept Doug way long enough. How do you get a hold of us, Pib?
You can find us on Facebook at The Bowdudes. Twitter is at Bowdudes. Instagram is at The Bowdudes. Or you can find us on email at thebowdudespodcast@gmail.com.
Send us some emails. Send us some questions. Hopefully we'll have Doug be a regular guest, as long as we don't keep him for 3 hours every time he comes up here.
Thanks, Doug.
I was reading some of the surveys, and some of the guys were saying you're kind of arrogant.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't have to be here. You guys know how to do this now.
Oh, yes, you do.
See you in the funny paper.
All right. See you later. Thanks,
Shut
Doug.
Up and shoot.
Thanks, guys.